In this lesson, we will focus on prepositions. Greek prepositions are words that, for the most part, can express meanings across a surprisingly large range. They're very little words. In English, we toss them off all the time and think precious little of them. In Greek, they do seem to be more varied in their usage and therefore more worthy of our attention when we're trying to think about what the Greek text actually said or might have said. Obviously, translating prepositions from Greek to English is another area in which the translator will make a lot of important decisions, often well-informed decisions, but decisions nonetheless which will foreground for the English reader one possible sense of the preposition. And in many instances, I'm sure, I've never actually quantified them, but in many instances, it's likely that the Greek hearer might have had to negotiate between several different plausible senses for that preposition. Obviously, thinking about contextual clues that he or she had already received going into that sentence with, with the prepositional phrase. So in this lesson, we're going to look a little bit more closely at these little words that potentially carry some significant meanings, especially as we look in the argumentative literature of the New Testament, where the logical flow and the precise sense that is being conveyed can be very important, and our understanding of the meaning can differ in some significant ways depending on how we understand, navigate particular prepositions. We've already seen at some length that the Greek case system already provides the Greek writer or Greek speaker with a way to convey what in English we tend to use prepositions to convey. In fact, require prepositions to convey. So even without the use of prepositions, Greek speakers and Greek writers, just using particular cases, can convey sense relationships that we ordinarily associate with our prepositions. For example, in the genitive case, we almost always have to use a preposition in English to represent what in Greek is simply the case of a noun. So with the genitive, we might use of, as in of Christ, or away from, or out of. And you've seen a bewildering variety of senses that the genitive case could carry in that regard. With the dative case, again, we almost always have to use an English preposition once we have decided which likely sense relationship the dative case is expressing, whether indirect object, usually yielding to in English translation, dative of advantage, usually yielding for in an English translation, dative specifying location, usually resulting in our translating it by the English preposition in, or the dative of means or instrument, which tends to lead us to by or with, or the dative of reference, which tends to be represented as regarding, with reference to, with regard to, some such more complex compound prepositional phrase. Now, Greeks also used prepositions alongside the use of bare noun cases. In many instances, prepositions are in fact necessary to articulate sense relationships between the noun or noun substitute, that is the object of the prepositional phrase, and some other element in the sentence. So you've got that, giving rise to a good many of the prepositions that we might encounter reading the Greek New Testament. But then, very often, Greek prepositions are redundant for simple case functions. And I would like to say that a good deal of the time, using a preposition allows a Greek speaker or a Greek writer to limit what possible range of senses he or she has in mind, rather than simply using a noun in the dative case. The Greek speaker or writer could use a preposition with a noun to narrow down what portion of dative senses might be activated here. Unfortunately, it is still the case that the most common prepositions in Greek also are rather fluid. So we still have to distinguish between a number of possible senses, as we'll see as we dig into looking at specific prepositions together in this module. Prepositions came to be used more and more during the Hellenistic period, that is, after Alexander the Great, into the 1st century AD, when all the New Testament writings were created, because Greek speakers apparently didn't like the multivalence or ambiguity of bare cases any more than y'all do. So, you find much more often in New Testament Greek than you would have found in Aristotle or Plato prepositions cropping up, which Aristotle or Plato would have considered simply redundant. Just use a noun in the dative case. Thank you very much. Just use a noun in the genitive case. But by the time the New Testament begins to be written, Greek speakers would prefer to give their hearers, or writers give their readers, a little bit more help. So you might find them using the preposition ek to focus on the typically genitive sense of origin, where something came from or came out of, or apo to focus on the sense of separation. So instead of just a noun in the genitive case, which could be, technically any one of 30-odd sense relationships, at least these prepositions focus that range a bit more narrowly. Not as much as we would wish. Believe me, I know. We would wish that a preposition in Greek had one sense so that it was unambiguous, but unfortunately language is just not that cooperative. Now, what I'm assuming in this slide is this principle. Prepositions are followed by nouns in particular cases. They are not Let me start that sentence again. A preposition is linked to a noun in a particular case to activate certain meanings of the preposition. When you think about a prepositional phrase in Greek, you won't think about the meaning of the preposition ek and then all the possible sense relations of the genitive case of the noun that follows it. The ek functions together with the genitive case of the noun that follows it to create a particular range of meanings that we find in Greek-English dictionaries under ek. Let me just go back for a moment to these others. You might find the preposition en, which is very similar linguistically to our preposition in, followed by a noun in the dative to focus on the dative sense of location. We're going to find out this week that en followed by a noun in the dative can also invoke other senses, but at least it narrows down the range of dative possibilities. For example, it will exclude the possibility of direct object or dative of advantage, so it at least will limit it, and in the majority of cases it does focus on the sense of location, in the sense of space, sometimes in the sense of time, the time at which as well as the space in which, although it can have some other senses as well. And then the preposition sun, followed by a noun in the dative, could be used to focus on the sense of accompaniment, which is another kind of dative, the dative of accompaniment. But with sun in front of the dative, it helps to focus on that particular dative sense. Now, this doesn't work for all prepositions. Some prepositions bring a lot more meaning to the noun in whatever case, and allow for the expression of relationships between that noun and the rest of the sentence that aren't covered by any of the cases. So, but at least with these four, for example, we can see how a preposition prioritizes, if nothing else, we can say prioritizes certain possible sense relationships of a particular case. I'll say it again because it is important. All Greek prepositions are followed by nouns or noun substitutes in particular cases. And the case of the noun or noun substitute that follows the preposition is part of the meaning signal of the preposition itself. They are not two separate signals to piece together. It is one combination. Where this becomes even more important is when we're dealing with Greek prepositions that can be followed by a noun in more than one case, with the result that the meaning of the preposition, the possible range of meanings invoked by the preposition, are changed depending on the case of the noun or noun substitute that follows it. One example is the Greek preposition kata. Kata can be followed, in the Hellenistic period at least, by nouns that appear in the accusative case, in some instances, and in other instances we will observe kata to be followed by nouns in the genitive case. When kata is followed by a noun in the accusative case, one set of meanings for kata is evoked, the most common of which would be according to. in accordance with. So, kata tein pistin, humon, in accordance with your faith. The importance of the accusative case of tein pistin is not independent, but rather its importance is the signal it gives for what set of senses of kata might be activated. Then, in other instances, we might find kata followed by a noun in the genitive case, and probably the most common of the senses invoked by that relationship is against. Hence, kata tu huiou tu anthropou, against the Son of Man. The genitive case of tu huiou tells the Greek hearer, or the Greek reader, that a different set of possible meanings for kata is being invoked in this instance. So when we look at prepositions, it's often very important also to look to the noun case, the case of the noun that is governed by that preposition. That is to say, the case of the noun that is the object of the preposition. And when you look up the meanings of prepositions in Greek-English lexica or dictionaries, it's important to look for that set of meanings, of sense relationships that go with the case of the noun that is the object of the preposition. So if you were to look up kata in BDAG or another lexicon, you would want to know that in the verse that you're studying, kata is followed by a noun in the genitive case. It is governing a noun in the genitive case. In which case, you look up those meanings that are connected with kata followed by a noun in the genitive, and you exclude the meanings listed under kata followed by a noun in the accusative case. How do prepositional phrases function? In Greek, just as in English, prepositional phrases can be used either to give more information about some noun or noun equivalent in a sentence, thus functioning adjectively, or a prepositional phrase can give more information about some action in the sentence, answering, for example, questions like, how was the action accomplished? For what purpose was it done? In what manner? Or when or under what circumstances did it occur? Thus, functioning as if it were an adverb. These are both very common uses in English. We do it all the time, and if you were to go to my PowerPoints on grammar, you'd see many examples of both. And similarly, in Greek, it's very common. And there are some good signals that help us know when for sure a prepositional phrase is functioning adjectively. And beyond that, it's something that one has to decide on the basis of context, whether the prepositional phrase is functioning adjectively or adverbially. A third possible function is substantival. That is to say, a prepositional phrase with the equivalent of the Greek word the before it could stand in for a noun or a thing, a person or a thing, or a group of people or a group of things. We'll look at this a little bit more in a moment, but the sense here is that the article, the Greek equivalent of the, can allow a prepositional phrase to function, that is to say, to function together, article plus prepositional phrase, as a noun. The ones in the field would be an example. In Greek, all you have is the word for the and the prepositional phrase in the field, the in the field. But the Greek here would understand that to be making the prepositional phrase to describe some discrete person or group of people, depending on whether or not the article is singular or plural. This means we need to take a few moments to think about the article and to become a little bit familiar with the concept of the definite article. In English, we have two different kinds of articles. We have an indefinite article, that is to say a dog, a book, a table, or we use the word an before a word that begins with a vowel, an apple, an orange. And when we use these words, we indicate that we don't have a particular noun in mind. We also have the definite article, the, which tends to indicate, when we use it, that we do have a particular dog in mind. When I ask my sons, have you taken the dog out? I'm speaking of Athena, a particular dog, the dog for whom we are responsible, and whose poop I'm tired of cleaning up from our closet. So when we have a particular noun in mind, we tend to use the word the. And the can also simply be resumptive. That is to say, if we're telling a story about a general dog, once we've introduced the general dog, then that dog becomes particular because he or she is the dog we're talking about. As in this example, a dog ran into the house while the door was left open. When the dog smelled the food, she ran straight for the kitchen. A dog becomes the dog as soon as we're pointing to a particular canine. Now in Greek, there is no special word that would be the equivalent of our a or an. They have no indefinite article. They simply name the noun without an article. And very often, that could be a signal that it is an indefinite noun. So biblion could simply mean a book. Greek, however, does mark nouns as definite with a definite article, the equivalent of our word the. So ta biblion becomes the book, and it indicates that whoever is speaking or writing these words has a particular book in mind by at least this point in the discourse. Now, in some respects, this begins to become a lot of information, but try to stay with me. We have encountered in our study of nouns that each Greek noun comes in a particular gender. Biblion, the word for book, is a neuter noun, and it's always a neuter noun. Thronos is a masculine noun. The word for throne, obviously, is a masculine noun, and it's always a masculine noun. Oh dear. Sphragus is a feminine noun. It means seal, and it's always a feminine noun. But every noun can appear either in the singular form or a plural form, depending on whether we're talking about one book or more than one book, singular or plural, one seal or more than one seal. And every noun can appear in any one of the cases. So every noun basically has 8 different forms. Where this becomes important, aside from knowing whether or not we're talking about a singular or plural noun, or dealing with the sense relationship of that noun within the sentence, is in this matter of agreement. If a Greek writer or speaker wants to attach a definite article, a word for the, to any particular noun, that definite article is going to have the same gender, number, and case of that particular noun in order to describe it, in order to be paired along with it. This is called agreement, and this concept is critically important. As a result, there are 24 different forms of the definite article, the Greek word for the. Here is a table showing those 24 forms. This is so that there is a proper definite article to go with every masculine noun in whatever case that noun might show up, in whichever number that noun might show up. So you need 8 articles for that, but then you need another 8 for those feminine nouns, so that the article can be matched to any feminine noun that might appear in whatever case, in whichever number. Hence another 8 forms, 16 so far. And then the same for neuter nouns, another 8. For students learning the multiple declensions of Greek nouns and Greek adjectives, the definite article can be a great friend, because I'm going to use the word only, and that might generate laughter, but there are only 24 forms of the definite article. And when you see these with particular adjectives, particular nouns, you might intuit from the definite article, at least begin to get a first hypothesis for what the gender, case, and number of the noun is that you're looking at. This is helpful because in Greek there are, it's numbered variously, but when I learned Greek, we talked about 5 different declensions, a whole lot of different endings, whereas you have a limited number of endings here. Now, of course, you can't always rely on the next noun in a Greek sentence to be paired with the article, but it gives Greek students, Greek readers, a starting place in that regard. So agreement is important. You want to make sure that an article has the same parsing as a noun before you jump to the conclusion that the article and the noun go together. And by parsing, I mean they have the same gender, they have the same number, they have the same case. Generally, Greek nouns that lack an article will be indefinite, while nouns with the article are definite. But, of course, there are always exceptions or further considerations to every rule. For example, there are other ways to make a noun definite besides sticking the Greek word for the in front of it. So as soon as you say Christ's faith, even without using a definite article with faith, you have made it definite because it is a particular person's faith. A less noble example, if I were to say my book, I don't have to use the book of mine. I can simply say my book, and that is still a definite expression. Be that as it may, we're looking at articles here, in particular with a view to thinking about prepositional phrases. and particularly looking for signals when a prepositional phrase needs to be treated like an adjective. For students working through Greek adjectives, these students learn that the position, the relative position of an adjective and a noun signal whether or not that adjective is an attribute of that noun or whether something else is going on. Now here we're only focusing on prepositions, but I want to introduce enough about adjectives so that attributive position makes sense to you. And agreement, again, is very important. Just as there are 24 forms of an article, so also there are 24 forms of every adjective. Because in order for an adjective to modify, to describe a particular noun, a Greek speaker or writer is going to put that adjective in the same gender, number, and case of the particular noun that he's trying or she's trying to describe. And then, if there is agreement in gender, number, and case between all these articles, the noun and the adjective, the Greek speaker or writer will use one of these two positions to indicate this adjective is describing this noun, and I don't want you to miss that connection. Now, where this becomes relevant for this week's lesson, the same thing can be done with prepositions. A preposition can be preceded by an article, and of course in this case, the article won't agree with the preposition because prepositions don't have case. N is always N, ek is always ek, kata is always kata. And the case of the noun that follows the preposition is something that pertains only to the preposition. So you could substitute here for adjective, you could substitute the words prepositional phrase. And that would be a pattern by which a Greek speaker or writer would signal this prepositional phrase is meant to describe this noun and give you more information about this noun. This could show up either in this position, in this sequence, an article, the noun that goes with the article, agreeing in gender, number, and case, another article, agreeing in gender, number, and case with the first two words, and then a prepositional phrase. Or the prepositional phrase can be stuck in between an article that agrees with a noun. With prepositions, the only agreement shows up in the first article, the noun, whoops, didn't want to do that, and then the second article that links a prepositional phrase to the first. In this particular instance, Matthew is writing ho pater, ho en tois uranois. Ho pater means the father. This word is a pronoun, it simply means your. So your father. But now Matthew wants to give more information about this father. And he doesn't want us to fail to understand that the prepositional phrase describes father and not some action in the sentence. So Matthew puts another article there to signal, ho pater ha, that the prepositional phrase is acting as an adjective describing father. Which father are you talking about? The one in the heavens. Now, I had mentioned earlier that prepositions could also function as noun I should say prepositional phrases, could function as noun stand-ins when they are preceded by an article, but of course not by another noun that agrees with this article in gender, number, and case. We only have, in this case, an article followed by a prepositional phrase. We don't have an article and a noun and an article and a prepositional phrase. In such an instance, ha en agro, the ha makes of en agro the description of an entity that is represented by all three words there, the one in the field. Let the one in the field likewise not turn back to the things left behind. We have another good example of this in Galatians 2:13, where we have an article, tous, the, followed immediately by a prepositional phrase. And there is no other article, there is no noun agreeing with tous in attributive position, like we saw in ha pater, ha prepositional phrase. In this instance, we have tous making a noun substitute out of a prepositional phrase, the ones of the circumcision. Very often the circumcision party in translations. Now, prepositional phrases can also function like adverbs. What we can say positively is that a prepositional phrase in Greek that is preceded by a definite article, a word for the, will either be adjectival, will be describing some other noun in the sentence, or it will be substantival. The article will make the prepositional phrase a label for some person, place, thing, group. Now, what happens when a prepositional phrase is not preceded by an article at all? Well, in many cases, that prepositional phrase will be functioning like an adverb. It will be used to provide more information about some action in the sentence. How did it happen? In what manner did it happen? Where did it happen? For what purpose did it happen? And so forth. A prepositional phrase that is used adverbially will never have a definite article right in front of the preposition. So here's an example from Galatians 2, verse 11. The prepositional phrases in this example are eis Antiocheon, essentially to Antioch, kata prosopon, essentially against the face, apo Jacobu, essentially from James, and meta ton ethnon, essentially with the Gentiles. So if we look at each one of them and how they function, all four of them can be understood as adverbial prepositional phrases giving more information about some action in the sentence, although one of them, the one with the question mark, is a bit ambiguous, and it's worth considering whether Paul means for it to be taken adverbially or adjectivally. So let's look at each of these. Hote de eilthen kephas eis Antiocheon. Eis Antiocheon to Antioch says something here about the action. Eilthen, he came. It's functioning adverbially. And there's really no other way to take that. There's no way to understand it adjectivally as describing Cephas, giving more information about this Cephas, Peter, of whom we're speaking. Kata prosopon, also gives more information about the action ant estein. I opposed. I opposed him. How did I oppose him? In what way did I oppose him? Kata prasopan, to his face. And we can skip down to the fourth one. Metaton ethnon says something about the action sun esthien. He used to eat. Just for the record, that's an imperfect indicative. So speaking about action that continued over some time in the past, he used to eat metaton ethnon, with the Gentiles. The prepositional phrase is adverbial. It's telling us about the eating. This third example could go either way. The prepositional phrase apo Jacobu from James could say something about the action, came, elthein, or it could say something about the people, tinas, certain people, certain ones. What people? People from James. Or does from James say something about the coming? Certain people came from James. Now, in this particular instance, there's not a great deal of semantic distinction. One could, if one pressed it, say, if it's adjectival, it's talking about a James party. James supporters came. If you take it adverbially, it's just talking about the point of origin of the movement of certain people. Certain people came from James. Now, unfortunately, we only get a clear clue about how a prepositional phrase functions when a definite article is present and precedes it. Then we know it's either adjectival or, in the absence of a noun in attributive position, it's substantival. Like our examples, the Father, the one in heaven, or our substantival example, the ones in the field. If it doesn't have a definite article, it could go either way. It's often valuable to try an adverbial sense first. Think about the prepositional phrase as describing the action. But one can't be at all rigid about that, because the prepositional phrase could still be functioning adjectivally even without a preceding definite article. This is because Greek authors and speakers became increasingly lazy about observing a clear distinction between adjectival prepositional phrases and adverbial ones. So when it is specified, that's great and it's clear, and there's a little signal there that the author really wanted to be clear, that is to say, by the presence of a definite article. But the absence of a definite article is not eloquent. It does not solve this for us. Therefore, when we face prepositional phrases, when we encounter them, we want to ask some focal questions. And the first one has to do with whether or not the prepositional phrase is functioning adjectivally or adverbially. Are there clues here to help us decide, that is to say, presence of articles, perhaps with nouns, all agreeing in gender, number, and case, communicating that the prepositional phrase is definitely adjectival? Or do we have to rely on other clues, like the meaning of the other words in the sentence, and simply whether or not it makes better sense at this point in the discourse, having read up to this point in the discourse, whether it makes better sense to take this adjectively, describing some noun in close proximity, or adverbially, describing some action in close proximity. And the second question, of course, is also very, very important. In fact, it's in some senses prior. What is the sense of the preposition in this instance. What clues do we have from dictionaries about the range of possible senses? And what clues do we have from the surrounding discourse about which sense of the preposition is likely to be activated in this particular context? We've covered a few contextual clues. A major one is the case of the noun that is the object of the preposition. Because with a good number of prepositions, not with all of them, but with a good number of prepositions, that is a major contextual clue, and it activates entirely different sets of meaning for the preposition. Remember our example of kata, which has one set of meanings when it's followed by a noun in the accusative case, but a second set of meanings when it's followed by a noun in the genitive case. And then are there other contextual clues that might lead us to expect this preposition to have a particular sense here? And again, the more complicated dictionaries often try to lay out what some of these contextual clues are. And of course, as part of the exercises, we'll be looking at these various lexica to try to learn how to decipher those clues to the extent possible.